So taking us to the agenda. We're going, as you can see here, we have a full agenda for our hour and a half together, but I promise you will hear from lots of different people, lots of different voices as we go, as well as have ample opportunity to actively engage in the conversation via chat and polling. We will begin with providing a very short overview of who CNC is for those in the room who are new to us. Then we're going to share some information about the state of Cambridge nonprofits based on our most recent survey data. And then we're going to highlight some CNC accomplishments as well as progress made on new CNC priorities. And then we're going to be engaging in a Q&A with City Manager Ian Wong before we close. First, before we really jump into things, though, I'd like to thank our funders and partners, the Cambridge Community Foundation, the City of Cambridge, MassCorps, 401k, Berkshire Bank, and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It's their generous support that helps make all of this work possible. I'd also really like to thank our steering committee for the many, many hours that they have dedicated to guiding and supporting me and this work. And of course, I'd like to thank my staff team for their many, many contributions, their humor, and their dedication to our mission. And speaking of mission, for those of you who are new to CNC, the mission of the Cambridge Nonprofit Coalition is to advance equity and justice in the community by strengthening the nonprofit sector, building collective voice, and promoting collaboration. We envision a city where all community members have equitable access to opportunities and resources. And I think that's so critical, so I'm going to say it one more time, where all community members have equitable access to opportunities and resources, and where the nonprofit sector is a valued partner in leading social change that addresses historical injustice. We are a coalition of 80 Cambridge nonprofits and growing, with a wide range of missions from early childhood education, youth development, to affordable housing production, arts and culture, environmental preservation, and much, much more. And we primarily do our work in three ways. One is creating and supporting spaces where nonprofit leaders can connect and share ideas, support, and resources. We share lots of information about community initiatives and activities that are relevant to nonprofits. And we also collect information about nonprofits to share back with decision makers and community stakeholders. And finally, we advocate. We advocate strongly about issues of shared concern all across our membership. So now I'd like to pass the mic to Daniel Michaud-Weinstock, who's going to be leading our first poll.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Wonderful to see you.
Ooh, sorry.
Good afternoon, everyone. I was on mute. Zoom, who knew? Wonderful to see you on this beautiful Thursday afternoon for the 2023 annual meeting. And part of what we like to do is understand who has joined us today, in addition to what you shared in the chat and the various weather experiences we're each having this week. We have a couple polls we're going to invite you to participate in. So can we launch our first poll, please? And we're inviting participation both through chat and poll throughout the day. So our first poll invites you to share what you're representing, who you're representing in terms of sector within the city. So please take a moment. You will see hopefully a poll pop up on your screen. You can only click one of the choices there and then hit submit. And we'll take a moment to let people respond. Give it another 15 seconds or so. See if you can identify yourself among those options, including other. And then we will close that poll and take a look at the results. Oh, there we go. All right. Majority of us representing a Cambridge serving nonprofit, some city folks, including the city manager. Welcome to you all, grant making institution and other. Thank you all for your response. So now that you are warmed up in practicing our poll technology, we're going to invite our second poll. And again, you'll get a pop-up on your screen. And then within the organization you serve, and particularly for folks from the nonprofit organizations, which represented almost 80% of you, what category best describes your organization's primary mission focus? And again, you only get one choice. So the key word here is your primary mission focus. And then a little bit of a test to see if you know whether you are already a member organization of the Cambridge Nonprofit Coalition. So take a moment, look at those choices to figure out what best describes your organization's primary mission focus, and to see if you remember if you've become a CNC member yet. The hint is if you haven't, you still can, but I might be previewing something that's going to come later. Take another 15 seconds. This is a very adept group of Zoom poll takers, I can tell. Then we will close this poll and see what we've got. Oh, the anticipation, y'all. Woo, there it is. All right, so let's see what we're noticing here. All right, so greatest percentage representing the arts, culture, and recreation realm. Number of folks representing other, and please feel free if you want to share your otherness. We welcome otherness always in the chat, please do. And then our next two leading categories are affordable housing and services for people who are unhoused, as well as early childhood education or youth development. Thank you. And 3/4 of us are already CNC members, and the other quarter is eagerly awaiting the opportunity to join. I'm confident. Thank you, Nicola. Economic Development also in the house. Cambridge Community Foundation in the house. Beautiful. All right, last poll for now, because 3 is a charm. Gail, wonderful to see you. Thank you for bringing the mediation and positive conflict engagement world into this sphere. I'm so curious to know how you identify yourself racially and ethnically. So what are the identities that you bring into this space in terms of race and ethnicity? How old are you? We're trying to understand a sense of our age range, gender identity. Do you identify as living with or having a disability? And if you're in an executive leadership position, how many years have you served? And part of what we want to uplift by asking these questions is just the recognition that these identities are always present. They always inform the perspectives that we hold and invite us to really be collectively tending to what it takes to create a nonprofit sector in a city that really is responsive to all of the richness of the identities that we bring within many systems and structures that typically don't do that. Thank you. Really important noticing of what's missing from that list of options in the ethnic and racial identity category. And so that's a learning already. This is already a rich opportunity for feedback for next time this kind of poll is launched. And we have some creative counters. Thank you, Gail. Yes, you can use whatever age conversion works for you, Celsius to Fahrenheit, Kelvin if you want. I don't know how many folks are familiar with that temperature and age scale. So take another 15 seconds. All right, let's see what we're going to get. Lois, good to see you. Thank you for naming different sector. All right, so we're going to pause with these results just for a moment to notice that the majority of us present identify as white. So almost 3/4, and about 20% identify as Black or African American. 4% is most multiracial, and 2% as Asian or Asian American, and Hispanic, Latino, Latina, Latine, or Spanish origin. And just want to name, and we will notice this again, that the majority of leadership among Cambridge nonprofits, as is true across the state, are white and continue to be white. And we have seen this as a dynamic across the sector, locally, statewide, and nationally for a long time. And it is something that the Cambridge Nonprofit Coalition is actively committed to doing its part to really ensure that our nonprofits are led in a way that reflects the communities that we're serving and shifts these numbers moving forward. How old are we? 50% of us are between 31 and 50. And then we start to move outward from there. A little under 20% between 18 and 30, and 1/4 of us between 50 and 70. And shout out to those folks above age 70 who represent part of us. And so again, noting the age distribution, and we'll note shortly some of the changes in leadership among the nonprofit sector. Gender identity is also a place of recognition. Almost 3/4 identify as female. In terms of living with or having a disability, 8% identify as yes, and some prefer not to answer. And then as we look at folks who identify as being in an executive leadership position, that over 40% have been in that position for 5 years or fewer. And so significant recognition of it being a time of change in nonprofit leadership, both within the city and more broadly. And then also noticing that we have a number of folks who have been here for more than 20 years, number of folks who have been here for over a decade, and how important both that stability is and what are the opportunities to learn together from both our seasoned folks and our folks who are newer to executive leadership to really make sure we're creating leadership opportunities and positions that enable people to thrive both individually in who they are and what they bring in service of their organizations. Thank you all. Appreciate you bringing just a sense of some of what you're bringing into the space, some of what makes up the broader Cambridge Nonprofit Coalition community. And I am excited to turn it over to some more members of the CNC staff to help us get a sense of the current state of Cambridge nonprofits. So Dana, I will pass the mic over to you.
Thanks, Daniel. So let's get into our annual survey data. So we conducted the survey in December of 2022, and we had 51 respondents total from the Cambridge nonprofit community. And we really were intentional with our outreach and tried to get as many responses as we were possible. And our overall aim for the survey was to get a pulse of the health of the sector and gather main concerns that were popping up for the organization. So this graphic really shows the wide variety of services that nonprofits provide to Cambridge. So the most frequently cited services that you can see in the graphic are youth development, which is a very broad area, followed by arts and culture, and then services for the unhoused population, such shelters, drop-in spaces, and any outreach that's occurring. And a thing to note about all of these categories is that we were very intentional in making revisions from last year's feedback to have the breakdown of categories be more clear, defined, and specific. So for example, we updated the youth development category to include all of those listed in the parentheses to really show the scope of what youth development is, as well as we updated the safety category to be more all-encompassing. So as we saw in our polling data, and also as we found in our analysis from the survey, that 55%, so a little over half of executive directors have been in their role for 5 years or less. And so you can see that in the darker purple part of the graphic. And so this really indicated to us that there is newer leadership in the sector, and it identified a focus area for us, which is how are we going to support new EDs in particular. So given turnover and many other factors that go into leadership of nonprofits, CNC has made it a priority to provide more support and resources for newer EDs in particular who have different needs and interests. And one way we do this is through the ED lunches, where any executive director is welcome to attend, so we can really build new ideas and provide mentorship and create a space of community, especially for the executive directors. So this slide is really showing us that overall leadership in Cambridge nonprofits and the state, as Daniel mentioned, and as we also saw in our poll today, that there's just less racial diversity overall, but also when comparing our survey data to statewide data from race to lead. So the darker purple columns here are Cambridge survey data, and the green is the state data. So you can see the stark difference, with the overwhelming majority of leadership in Cambridge identifying as white. And what is very important to note is that most organizations are serving individuals and communities of color. So from this data and anecdotally, we have heard and know the mismatch of who is leading and running the organizations and who is typically served by them. So this is a really prominent point for us, and we want to keep asking more specific questions around these differences and how we could potentially create change here. So now I'll pass it to Eugenia Schroff to cover the rest of our annual survey data findings.
Thank you. Okay, so it's my task to cover you a 3-part series that we've called The Sector is Vulnerable. And I would say that these statistics were a little bit of a surprise to us. And as we were thinking about how, in the full report, you're going to see a lot more detail on the financial challenges that the sector is facing right now. But we thought that the 2 statistics that really leapt out to give you that quick snapshot were these on the slide here. So over 60% of nonprofits started 2023 with a break-even or deficit budget. And you can see that in the purple column. And we thought that that made sense with other statistics we'd collected. So if you look at the first blue column, well over 50% said that revenues were the same or less than in 2021. And meanwhile, probably not a surprise if you read the news, but 82% of nonprofits said that expenses had been higher than in 2021. So when you put those two things together, it does make sense that we started this calendar year with sort of vulnerable budgets. And another way of thinking about the financial challenge of the sector right now is to think about the question, are you prepared for disruptions? And unfortunately, we'd like to see everybody in that green sector there. That's just 16% of fully prepared. But you can see that that was certainly not the case. And almost 80% only felt somewhat prepared, with 3 nonprofits reporting they didn't feel prepared. And another way of continuing our 3-part series here is to take a historical look at the revenue data and to show that for the nonprofit sector in Cambridge, the pandemic still lives on. And this really surprised us. The first 2 columns on the left are probably more or less what you might have expected. So if we look at the end, the first column on the left at the end of 2020, almost 85% saw a revenue decline or plateau. That was at the end of the first year of the pandemic. That makes sense. And then at the end of 2021, we see things are still not great, with almost 60% in that revenue decline or plateau category, but yet we see a substantial improvement. And I think that many of us thought that that improvement trend would continue. And the truth is, at the end of 2022, it really looked like at the end of 2021. And another way of thinking about that is that for 3 years straight, most nonprofits at the end of the year said our revenues have plateaued or decreased, which is, again, not exactly what we wanted. And then finally, after financial capacity, staffing capacity, this again is not going to surprise anybody in the Zoom, I don't think. But at the end of 2022, we saw that about 70% of nonprofits had open positions, and that's already concerning, but then more than half lack the funding to hire for that. So if you look at the pie chart, the blue indicates about 1/3 of nonprofits without open positions. The green indicates about 1/3 of nonprofits that have open positions but can fund them. And then the purple is our most concerning sort of third, over 1/3 of nonprofits don't have that funding to fill the positions. So now, well, how does these capacity issues translate into serving the city and fulfilling the missions of our nonprofits? On the left, you can see that demand is definitely overwhelmingly up for most nonprofits, with 71% saying demand increased over 2021 and full 25% saying it stayed the same. So demand is there. Unfortunately, if you look at the smaller pie chart, you can see that 1 out of 3 says they can't fully meet that demand, which should make sense based on our cheerful series of slides that we just walked you through. And so part of our mission is to really get the sector into a state where we're in this green state here, 17% of nonprofits right now who say they can fully meet demand. That's what we want for our sector. And then we're going to end with thinking about the relationship between the city and the nonprofit sector. On the left is a question we asked for the first time. First was just how many of our responding nonprofits get directly funded by the city, just 57%. And we did surface some issues that were of concern about time it takes for contracts to get executed and time it takes to receive payment. We are really delighted with how this conversation has gone so far, and we found the city leadership to be really receptive and committed to working on this issue. So we're very delighted to have started the conversation and excited to see where it goes. Finally, this is our last piece from the survey data. We asked an open-ended question: how can the city better support the Cambridge nonprofit sector? So these are spontaneously given answers that we tried to categorize, put order on them. If you're a statistics person, that's why the numbers are a little bit lower. Still, it's obvious what stands out. Easier access to more funding was the top answer by a lot. And we're really hopeful about what it will look like at the beginning of 2024 when we look at the survey data and see if the Cambridge Nonprofit Recovery Fund isn't some kind of an answer to that. But I thought it was worth just a quick second on the other columns here, because they were spontaneously given, and I think they have a lot to say. So more collaboration and listening is the first blue one. Interestingly, 3 nonprofits talked about how the collaboration would be better with the city if they hired more staff. So just an interesting thing that 3 people described kind of vividly and interesting. 2 wanted the city to provide more in-house services. And finally, we had 2, again, this is spontaneously given answers. 2 nonprofits talked about how strong their relationship is with the city. We really loved seeing that. And for us, that's a model to think about and to work for all of the nonprofits here in the city. And I'm passing it on to Daniel.
Thank you, Dana and Eugenia. Want to just invite people who've already been using the chat to great effect, and just invited you to hear about and look at a lot of significant information about the state of the nonprofit sector in Cambridge. So I want to invite you to pause, notice for a moment for you what's standing out to you in that data and from the survey results, and please share your reflections and thoughts in the chat. And I just want to note, first of all, as we know, and it's so important to celebrate and uplift, that our nonprofit organizations, their staff, are tirelessly doing incredible work on a day-to-day basis to continue to meet their mission and respond to our residents in so many different ways. And so we are holding the both and of both some of the trends we're seeing existed before COVID, worsened during COVID, and we're seeing intensify in terms of what it means to be a nonprofit organization in this day and age of 2023, and yet still the incredible capacity to be doing really vital work with and for people in Cambridge endures. So kudos to all y'all doing the work every day. And thank you for folks sharing your reflections in the chat. Take another minute just to see what else emerges for you. Thank you indeed. Needing to uplift more leaders of color. Persistent financial challenges impact staffing and service delivery. Critical nature of financial support to lead to sustainability for organizations. Hiring challenges and staffing. All really key factors. Thank you all. Please continue to use the chat to add your ideas. We'll capture these as well for continued learning within the coalition, and I'm going to pass it over to Elena.
Thanks, Daniel. So now we're going to transition from talking about a lot of the challenges that we're seeing currently in the local sector vis-a-vis the data, to some of the things that we've still managed to accomplish, even in this time of challenge and difficulty. And the first major accomplishment we really wanted to raise up is around the ARPA Cambridge Nonprofit Recovery Fund. As you can see here on this slide, CNC engaged in the discussions about where to invest Cambridge's $87 million in American Rescue Plan Act funds from the very beginning. We worked to keep nonprofits informed about what ARPA was, what it could be invested in, what the process would look like. We worked with the Cambridge Community Foundation and the city to hold an overview session. And then, we sort of stayed tapped into what was going on at the City Council Finance Committee, because that's really where all of this was taking place. Next, we sort of engaged in a fairly long-term advocacy work around what would ultimately become the Cambridge Nonprofit Recovery Fund, which has secured $6 million for nonprofits to address the negative economic impacts of the pandemic. And there were a couple of different pieces to this. So we had to develop a proposal. And we did that with input from Cambridge nonprofit leaders as well as city leaders. We needed to build a case for our proposal through using our survey data, as well as doing research on, what other cities and towns were doing with ARPA funding. And finally, we organized quite a bit of sector advocacy, and this included emails and testimony, as well as regular engagement with the administrative city leaders and staff. And finally, we worked very closely with the city finance department to actually, administer this, or at least create a process to administer it. We worked together to design the application and finalize eligibility requirements. All along, we prioritized making the fund as accessible as possible by holding info sessions with our partner, Conduit Government Relations, who will also be providing technical assistance, which was built into the program. And then we've just been promoting it as much as possible because we really want to make sure that everyone who is eligible benefits from this fund. And there are just two quick things I want to raise before I move on to the next slide. One, I want to give a major shout out to the City of Cambridge Finance Department and Conduit for their commitment to working together on this process. There is a tremendous amount of detail and nuance when it comes to putting pieces like this together, and it really was a team effort, so thank you. And I also want to take this opportunity to remind everyone that the application is open. And it's going to close in a couple weeks on July 7th. And so I urge you not to wait until the last minute to apply. Conduit is there to answer your questions. If you have questions, when in doubt, reach out. Don't wait, apply today. So in addition to the work around ARPA, we have a couple of different subcommittees that are going forward. And two of them listed on this slide are looking really at like mission specific activity, and one that's sector wide. And so that sector strategy, that was where all of our planning around the ARPA proposal and the advocacy for the Cambridge Nonprofit Recovery Fund took place. But that wasn't the only thing that this group is thinking about and strategizing around. The others are the Community Benefits Fund, so making sure we're giving input into how that process is going. We have 2 representatives on the Community Benefits Advisory Committee, which allow us to do that, and want to be in conversation and plan to be in conversations around the future of what that fund will hold. And finally, explorations on the anti-aid amendment, what it applies to and its impact on our nonprofit community. Then we have unhoused advocacy. This group meets probably about every 2 weeks to share information, give updates to each other. These are unhoused service providers, but it also turned into a very good way to bring city leaders in and strategize and give input on some of the things that are happening on the ground. And a few examples of that are providing input to the WASH survey and resulting planning, talking about the shelter bed capacity challenges, as well as the current rollout of the community safety department. And finally, we have the Arts and Culture Subcommittee. They did a lot of work this year to create a framework for and bring folks in for 3 neighborhood meetings to promote arts organizations and spark new partnerships. And we also use the space to talk about policy issues that were going on that are relevant to the arts and culture community. And I think the best example of that was the conversation about the Peter Valentine property, which has the potential to both support affordable housing and the arts community. And those conversations are ongoing. And all the while, we have continued doing the things that fit into our networking and network building work. So as we've talked about already, we've been hosting monthly ED lunches for the last couple of years. Over the pandemic, it was all online. We were excited to bring back in-person lunches on a quarterly basis, which have been a great time. So I want to thank YWCA Cambridge and the Cambridge Community Center and History Cambridge for being some of our hosts this year. And these spaces are are wonderful spaces for leaders. They share and give advice, they share resources, they share information, and it's a space to hold joy, which is not something we prioritize nearly enough. We also launched a monthly member feature where we profiled a couple of different, as you can see here, organizations on our website, in our newsletter, and on our blog. We recognized National Nonprofit Day with a social media campaign on self-care. And then we hosted a nonprofit open house with CCTV, where leaders were able to get free headshots, and the photographers were CTV's youth media program students. So at this point, I'd like to introduce Michael Delia of East End House, a member of our steering committee and one of the leads on our strategic planning process, to talk about our new strategic plan and our priorities.
Thank you, Elena. Hi, everybody. It's really great to see everyone here today. Nonprofit leaders, close partners. My name is Michael Delia. I'm the Executive Director of East End House and also the Chair of the Sector Strategy Subcommittee, but also a founding member of the Cambridge Nonprofit Coalition. And I just want to mention, about 10 years to this very day, the Cambridge Nonprofit Coalition was formed. We had the very first convening at Cambridge College on June 11th, 2013. 40 executive directors were there. We had many people from the city administration who joined us to be part of the convening. And we really began a conversation about how we could work together in more impactful ways. Out of this grew the formation of the Cambridge Nonprofit Coalition, but also a real strong commitment that the Cambridge nonprofit leadership was ready to build strong partnerships with each other, with other sectors, in order to meet changing needs, close the opportunity gaps, and improve the quality of life for the community. This is critical because we have approached this work with a sense of urgency from the beginning. We've been looking at data as we work on the ground in communities and hear the lived experience of residents. Mental health issues, to financial insecurity, to the impact of toxic stress, the lack of affordable housing, and so many other issues that really affect the quality of life. And we know that when we talk about lives, it's so important to move quickly. And so we've always approached this work with a sense of not only urgency, but also to try to be strategic, because we're talking about a big vision, trying to really bring people together in new ways to really, in a very concrete way, improve the quality of life for all Cambridge residents and really advance equity and access. Fast forward to today, we have been engaged in a strategic planning conversation since March of 2022, and which led to the identification of high-level priorities for the coming 3 years. And those are in basically 4 buckets. One is that CNC is a vibrant, thriving organization with the capacity to respond to change. CNC and its members are engaged in dynamic, mutually beneficial relationships, responsive to the needs of each other. The CNC influences political outcomes, including changes to city funding, decisions, policies, and practices, and improve the ability of the Cambridge nonprofits to advance their missions. And there's a lot of detail in all of these, in the 3 buckets that I just mentioned. In terms of number 1, for example, we really drilled down in trying to identify definitions for our work in diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, and wanted to really begin with basic definitions so that we could hold ourselves accountable to making this central to all our work moving forward. We also have decided to become a 501c3 organization, which includes a significant investment in improving the operating capacity of the CNC to have greater impact. In membership, members are so important to us. The ability to have reciprocity with members, to aggregate, to bring members together, to incubate ideas, constant communication and feedback is really important. The use of data to really find out what's happening on the ground. And number three, of course, is to really work with other sectors to create change, because we can't do it alone. Just want to give a shout out to number 4, which is our emerging theory of change and theory of action. If we could go to the next slide. Yeah. And I just want to say at the get-go, there's no magic with any of this. This is just a classic cartoon regarding theory of change. It says, I think you should be more explicit here in step 2. And step 2 says, then a miracle occurs. So we don't really believe in miracles. We believe in disciplined people coming together in disciplined ways, doing disciplined thinking to take disciplined action. And so if we want to hop to the next slide, this is hard to read, but there's a lot that's packed in here. But I just want to summarize some key components. Since the beginning of the CNC, we have been thinking very carefully about how do we bring people together? How do we have difficult conversations? So going back to June 11th, 2013, we really looked at what kind of facilitation we wanted. And we used a very discrete type of facilitation method to lead us through challenging conversations. We have used that moving forward, and there's been a lot of time talking about collective impact. John Kenya, who is the person who coined that phrase in 2011 in the Stanford Social Innovation Review, has been a friend, a partner to us from the very beginning, helping us to think through this very complex work. At the end of the day, I think that one thing that we all agree upon is that relationships are so critical. It's so important for us to reach across sectors and try to develop common approaches, common language, where we can work together in new and different ways to really have significant impact on some of the really deeply entrenched social issues in Cambridge. And so I'm going to stop there and pass it off to Dana.
All right. So I will be covering a summary of our one-on-one member meetings that we have been conducting over the past few months. So we have held 20 member meetings to date, and these meetings are conducted with Elena and I, as well as typically the executive director or senior leadership of one of our member organizations. And the main intentions are to strengthen relationships, build trust, hear really what is going on the ground, since we are operating at a very macro level, and get a pulse on current needs. So we wanted to share about what we have been learning and hearing. So the main learnings so far are falling into these 4 buckets here. So for organizational development, people shared with us that they have marketing needs, as well as needs to increase engagement with their programs and services and get the word out about their events, as well as HR needs to recruit, hire, and retain staff to really combat the volatile labor market that most nonprofits are facing currently. So for professional development, there are some pretty clear training needs that were identified that many organizations mentioned. So addressing and managing burnout was one that came up often, as well as the need for more anti-racism and DEI training, following with financial management training for both leadership, staff, and board members. And the next area, fundraising. So as we heard in this meeting, as the survey results indicated, nonprofits are very much strapped for money right now, and particularly there were things shared around needing funding that had limited restrictions and strings attached, because that has created a lot of work for staff who are working extremely hard to find funding sources. And also with the money, the need is to have sustainable and equitably sourced money as well, so that it's not just a one-time grant, although those are great as well, but really people can project and plan for the future for their organizations. And finally, connectedness. So we really heard the need for creating more spaces for nonprofit staff to connect, convene, and collaborate within specific subsectors and mission areas, but also across sectors to really cultivate the sharing of ideas with organizations with many different mission areas. And there was also a particular theme that was coming up around affinity groups. So having very specific groups for support, fellowship, etc. So thank you so much to those who participated thus far. This is a continuing project. So if you'd like to participate, please let us know. It has given us a ton of information to think about, and will continue to inform our planning and next steps moving forward. So now I will hand it over to Marissa Grooms, Chair of the Membership and Governance Subcommittee, who will talk about other strategic priorities.
Thank you, Dana. Hi, everybody. I'm Maritza Grooms. I'm the Associate Director of Community Relations at CCTV, and I chair the Membership and Governance Subcommittee here at the CNC. We've got some exciting stuff going on, and as you've heard, one of those big things is seeking 501c3 status. Many are surprised to learn that CNC is still fiscally sponsored. However, we've outgrown this structure and we're starting down the path to 501c3 status. Big shout out to the Lawyers Clearinghouse, who's provided us with pro bono lawyers from Kirkland and Ellis to help us with this process. We are actively working on bylaws, and honestly, a lot of that heavy lifting has been done by Elena. Shout out to Elena, researching and reading bylaws. That is not the most fun, but it's the necessary work to get us where we're going. And next we'll be applying for that tax status from the federal government and designing how we want our board to look, and really, leaning on some of those things that we provided in the past with people like Boulay and other leaders in the community, what boards could be and what they should be. So hopefully that is where we're headed. And if this is of interest to you, we invite you to join the Membership and Governance Subcommittee. There will be a survey at the end of the meeting where you can indicate your interests. Hope to have some more folks join us here. One of the other things we're doing is, increasing the fundraising focus and adding human resources so that 501c3 status will allow CNC greater access to funding and help us expand our staffing beyond Elena consultants and interns. And that'll also help us to provide more support and resources for nonprofits and be visible in more places to raise awareness about the role nonprofits play in Cambridge. We love that. Expanding those offerings for Cambridge nonprofits. Dana spoke a little bit about this. A lot of the themes that came out of the one-on-one member meetings included workshops and trainings that could look like conflict skills and support around difficult conversations, addressing burnout training, which we probably all need, navigating the city government, also CNC compiling and distributing nonprofit trainings available by other orgs like TS&E, Mel King Institute, Philanthropy Mass, MNN, etc. And those affinity groups, we're always looking to deepen relationships and give opportunities for connections. Those affinity groups could look like EDs of color, new EDs, young adult nonprofit staff, and smaller orgs. We definitely want to be highlighting member events. And I think I saw that in the chat somewhere. We definitely want to do that because you all are doing such amazing work, bringing people together. And we want to make sure that people know about it. So creating a listserv for members to promote programming and connect informally. Could also look like a Slack channel, Teams, Google group, who knows? So many opportunities. And of course, continuing to highlight fundraising opportunities for all of us. And deepening relationships also with our city leaders, which is a big part of what today has in store for us. We have our new city manager here and invited him into the space in our community for a discussion. And before we do that, I know I'm going to hand it off to Daniel, who will take it away and be fabulous as usual.
Thank you, Maritza. And you are fabulous always too. So grateful to be in space with you, energized by your voice and presence always. Just going to invite a moment of both celebration and reflection to just, again, we're sharing a lot of information about where CNC is and where it's going. And y'all are a key part of all of that. And just want to invite you before I introduce the city manager to take a moment to consider what of CNC's accomplishments or future activities are you energized by. And we already see some folks using the chat to do that. I'm going to invite the rest of you to do so. So we'll take literally about 30 seconds before I move us along to honor all of our time. Right. Thank you. Keep those reflections and reactions coming. I am going to move us forward to welcome officially. He's been with us since the beginning today. Cambridge's city manager, Ian Wong. So welcome to you. And as we know, one of the things that nonprofits are always adept at navigating is the constancy of change. And CNC, as part of its work, is always attuned to the realities of change and being able to respond accordingly. And the appointment of Ian as city manager is really a significant change for the city and its leadership. He comes from outside the city structure. He's an Asian man. He has experience in and with nonprofits that he's bringing to his role. And he also is raising a family with young children in Cambridge. So brings different identities and experiences than what we've seen in the people holding the city manager position before. And the opportunity before us now in the next 30 minutes or so is for an initial conversation for Ian to deepen his understanding of CNC, for this community to hear from him, with the recognition that there will be future opportunities to come together, including some planning around a fall connection and convening. And so we encourage you to please use the chat, continue to use the chat during the conversation ahead. if and as questions come up for you. The format that we're going to use in this time is that we have various of the members of CNC's steering committee who are going to be asking questions. They represent different of the committees that we've been hearing about. The questions that are going to be posed to Ian were shared with him in advance to make sure he had a sense of what to be responding to. And they came from this community, that it was put out to you all in CNC's newsletter. What do you want to know? What are you curious about asking and hearing about from the city manager at this point in time? And then the steering committee was able to consolidate those into the questions that you will hear in a moment. So welcome, Ian. I'm actually going to start with the first question, and then we'll be moving it along to different voices, some of which we've heard already. And so as you both make your voice known, the question that I'm going to put to you is, where do you see new or expanded opportunities for collaboration between the city and the nonprofit sector?
Thanks so much, Daniel, and really appreciate being here. I have met some of you, and I think we actually did have a sort of more focused meet and greet a little earlier in the fall, where we were trying to reach out to, especially like the nonprofit community. So I think I've met some of you during that time as well. But very great to see this. I think it's really amazing to see the sector coming together and thinking about how to support each other. And I know how big a role the city plays in this whole ecosystem. So very excited about new expanded opportunities. I think I would kind of say like all of the above. A lot of the work that is happening that I see in this room, they're all things that I think we are wrestling with as a city. So whether that's looking at educational outcomes and the achievement gap, arts and culture, and how we support and sustain those spaces in the city. I know that there's a lot of conversation, not just in the city, but especially at the state level as well, about workforce development. I know that we are having conversations about our unhoused community and how we support them more, and also manage the tension in our public spaces. And I think there's even more that I think goes beyond that. And so I think all of those end up being things that are really valuable. And I think one of the things that got me really excited about the city is being able to recognize that these are all important parts of where we want to make investments, we want to make a difference. And so I can kind of see the city having those conversations across all those different areas, and I think deepening that and figuring out how we are coordinating across all the different players is definitely something I'm excited about.
Thank you very much. I get to pass the mic back to my dear colleague Maritza for the next question.
Oh, I'm catching it. Hi, Jan. I'm Maritza from CCTV. You just heard from me, the chair of the Membership and Governance Subcommittee at CNC. Lovely to meet you in this space. Hopefully we get to meet in person soon. What is your approach to authentically incorporating the voice and expertise of nonprofit leaders into planning around current city budget priorities, such as affordable housing and homelessness, universal pre-K, after school, and more?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say a lot of what is in our current state. You know, I see how connected a lot of our city departments are to stakeholders in the community, and particularly our nonprofit community. I think it has generally been the case that I feel like actually we have a very robust like civic landscape. You know, I think there actually is a set of ears that are listening in the city side much more than I think people realize. And so all of the emails that kind of get sent through, whether it's from members in this room or people in the community, they do really end up with folks in the city. I think probably where it feels like we could be improving is, I don't think that there's enough formal structure for thinking about how are decisions actually being made, and how are we establishing something a little bit more than just advisory structures. And so I think this is sort of a piece of feedback I hear a lot, which is I think people speak a lot. And so there are a lot of voices that are present in our community, and those voices are heard, but there's not a lot of communication back oftentimes. And I think it's also not often clear to folks like which room are what decisions being made in. And I think that's where we could probably do a better job. And so I think the challenge in today's world is the city is absolutely being influenced by the community, by the council, by the nonprofit community, but we're not doing a great job really allowing people into those rooms and setting up appropriate structures to say like this is actually how things are happening. And I think there is a question about how power is shared. And I don't think I have a great answer to that. I would say like one of the challenges and the reason why I kind of say like we need to really think this through and there's a need for there to be more of a structure for this is as much as we want sort of more inclusive decision making, I also kind of recognize that for the most part, you know, we all are looking to bring the right answer into that conversation and we don't all agree. And so I think the city has maybe been a little bit trapped in a situation where instead of like figuring out how to wrestle with that and find a way for all of us to have different voices and yet come to common decisions, we've instead said, we will listen to all of that and then we're going to make a call. And really, please just trust us that we're incorporating all those voices. So I find my experience has been that we are authentically trying to process all of that and make, you know, fair decisions. We could be more transparent, but then there's a way for us to also figure out when we are trying to be more inclusive, we do have to figure out how to share that power effectively. Otherwise, it can get a little bit chaotic.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Elena to ask the next question.
Thank you so much, City Manager, for being here. So my question is about process and structure. So what city structures, systems, or departments do you see a need to strengthen or build upon? Where do you see opportunities to streamline? And how do you think any of these changes might affect the nonprofit community?
I think we could probably streamline some of our processes around contracting. And so I know a lot of people are on mute, otherwise I feel like if we were in person, I'd be getting some chuckles. You know, I think that there's definitely like challenges in bottlenecks in those bits, and we could there's sort of work we're doing internally to try and address that. And I think we could do a better job communicating as well about where things are. I think ARPA is a great example. I know that a lot of folks are working through that. I do think that one of the challenges we face as a city, and you know, I know that for all of you, you look at the city and we have just immense resources, and there's not really any denying that. And yet, I will say that the human resources within the city probably feel a little bit closer to some of the experiences that all of you have. And so, you know, when kind of the ARPA money came in, it wasn't really like the city hired a ton of extra people to administer and distribute and build all of these programs that I think we're trying to work through across, you know, $80 million. So I think the ARPA grant making process has certainly had its growing pains. I do know that a lot of the city's teams really were tied up just working through the Rise Up Cambridge program, which just launched. And so that, you know, there was ultimately an unfortunate trade-off where like our resources really were like sucked up doing that, and then we weren't able to administer all of the other grants. but I think we are working to both streamline that and make sure that we're communicating to everybody. Matt Nelson in the city manager's office has kind of stepped up and I think has probably talked to a number of folks on this call. And I think, you know, we did sort of run the numbers. This is a little bit dated, but I think we have actually gotten about 38 of our grants either complete or the money is basically moving out the door, which represents about 40% of the total dollars. We've got another 47 ARPA grants, which represents about 50% of the total dollars that is still kind of in that process. So, you know, we're working with you, getting budget, scope of work, going back and forth, doing the legal contracting. But I think one of the, you know, to I think, Elena, your question, we need to do a better job, both like finding ways to improve on the city side, but also just being more clear on how we're tracking that. And then we can communicate to you so that as we move forward, we can say, hey, we've gotten this percentage of the money out the door. These are the number of grants that we've gotten completed. This is how much is left. So I think we're working to try and do a better job on that front. And I think that probably applies to not just the ARPA side, but also our overall operations.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to Maggie to ask our next question.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you again for being here today. I'm Maggie Moore Abdow with Central Square Theater. I am the co-chair of the Arts and Culture Subcommittee, along with Rachel Roqueburton, who's also on this call with us today. And our question today is, what is your approach to promoting a culture of innovation and possibility within the city of Cambridge and navigating around obstacles such as the anti-aid amendment that limit creativity and funding relationships with nonprofits?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I would say, and I was just having a conversation internally with the law department today. So, you know, these are definitely fairly active conversations. I think we're still navigating that. I mean, I think that Massachusetts is in an interesting spot where the anti-aid amendment, I think, legitimately creates some level of constraint. And maybe that's actually a really good question to say, like, oh my gosh, like this amendment was created, I don't know when, like a long time ago, and does it still make sense? And is it really struggling to, is it sort of hampering legitimate activities that we can see other states are able to do? I also think there are likely more gray areas that we should be better working through. And that's going to be the intersection of how I think we are trying to say this is what we want to do as a city, and then working with the law department and various lawyers to figure out how do we do this legally and what are our options. I do think one of the things that I keep asking is how have other cities interpreted the same statutes that apply, and what legal justifications they are using in order to run these similar programs. And so my hope is that we are being guided a little bit more by sort of like, these are the ultimate outcomes that we're trying to get to. And then let's find legal ways to do that without running afoul of you know, real statutes that that we actually have to comply with. So I think this is sort of a hard question to answer, because on the one hand, ultimately, I am quite committed to being compliant with our laws and to not put ourselves into complicated situations. And I've been like very clear as we've like gone through various, you know, messy issues that that's always going to be our North Star. But at the same time, there are ways that we can do this, and hopefully we can find more flexibility.
Thank you for that, Neon. I'm just going to ask you to, if you're willing to share a little bit more about sort of this notion of a culture of innovation and sort of how you think about that and approach that within your leadership. And beyond the anti-aid amendment, what are some of the ways where you're thinking about moving that, promoting that within the city?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I mean, innovation can kind of mean so many different things to different people. I mean, I guess I do kind of come in and I feel like what I've really loved about the city is I think everybody is actually pretty aligned on what the goals are. I think we're actually like pretty well aligned on our values. I think sometimes it is innovation, but sometimes it's, I sort of see it as, can we be more flexible and organized? Can we act more urgently? Can we figure out how we prioritize so we do 3 things really well instead of 10 things poorly? I guess I think maybe, and I kind of hesitant because what I don't want to say is like, I'm not somebody who loves innovation. I do. I think maybe it is because of my background. I mean, I come from healthcare and hospitals and a safety net system. And I think I've always been, and I've been in the nonprofit sector for a long time, I guess I've always been a little bit suspicious of the new idea. And my kind of journey in the nonprofit sector is like, things work on like a 10-year cycle, and like there's a brand new idea that everybody thinks is going to change the world, and then it gets a bunch of funding, and then everybody forgets about it and moves on to the next one. And so I think for me, I guess like I'm much more focused on not necessarily like where is that silver bullet, but more to say we have really hard problems that we need to solve. We need to understand and pick those apart and then actually solve them. And it's more about being really effective, really understanding how you're organizing your teams, getting alignment on what the real priorities are. I think I feel much more like a bit of a like the world changes through execution, like really, really good execution, really good strategy. And I will leave the like, the new technological development, the big risk taking. I'm not sure if that is always the role of the city as an entity. Like, I think we should be funding those bets, but the things that you really depend on us on are things that we want to get right and things that we really just need to get more organized about.
Thank you very much for going there. And I'll pass the mic over to Darren. Good to see you.
Thank you. Good to see all of you. My name is Darren Cordy. I'm the executive director at the Cambridge Community Center. And my question is, most nonprofit staff are not paid as competitively as either public sector or for-profit business employees. We're wondering what ideas you have that could ease the burden of nonprofit staff who either live or work in Cambridge. So are there any simple modifications, services, or perks that we could work together to offer? And just one example, we often hear that daytime parking is an issue for nonprofit employees who can't afford to live in Cambridge. Could we explore some sort of unique parking pass for nonprofit employees?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I mean, I think I feel that deeply. Like, I think the challenges of the city, high housing costs, the ways that we are trying to create a community that is more accessible to everybody is a real challenge. I think on the specifics of parking, I would say this is a real challenge for our nonprofit sector employees, for private childcare providers, for city employees who are trying to park. I think I'm still actually digging into this because I will say I probably get like an email every month with just like the latest really significant challenge, because you have people who are coming in, they're trying to park, they're getting tickets, and it's not a great situation. There are real limitations on the city's ability to, issue special permits to park in resident spots, as an example, which comes up a lot. I think the one area that there's potential, and where I hope that where we are starting to point folks is, as you know, so much of like the private sector has moved into hybrid work arrangements. There are a lot of empty parking garages, like commercial parking garages in the city. And I think we are trying to say, I think it's not really a role the city can play to go talk to these garages and try to like negotiate special rates or contracts, but I think we are trying to encourage folks to look into those opportunities, and I'm hoping to like hear back from folks that we've pointed to say like this worked or this didn't work or what the obstacle was. But I think occupancy at a lot of these like especially in Cambridgeport, Kendall Square, but even in some other areas of the city, I think occupancy is at like 60% max. And so there is actually oddly a lot of commercial parking available. And if folks are willing to just recognize that a 10 or a 15-minute walk from that garage is not unreasonable, there may be more options. So maybe that's something we should follow up. So like, if that works out, great. If it doesn't work out, let me know what the problem is.
Yeah, and just curious, and then I want to move on to the last question. Ian, other thoughts just about sort of the recognition of compensation, for nonprofit staff, and are there other roles the city might play in easing that burden that you'd identify in this moment?
Yeah, I think it's a hard one. I mean, I think that there is just like a larger economic challenge here. I think I in particular see the equity implications of sort of these dynamics, right? I mean, as I was listening to the conversation, we're having a conversation about like how we actually bring more people of color, people of lived experience into our nonprofit sector, and it doesn't help if essentially like the compensation is just a lot lower. I think these are just incremental things that folks are going to have to work through, and I certainly think the city over time has probably more on the bottom end, right? So like the city has moved toward paying living wages. I think that actually has applied to the contracts that we sign. And so you sort of see that playing out as we try to support that broader economic ecosystem. As you think about like universal pre-K, it's been very deeply part of the conversation that me and Ellen and Lisa Grant, who's heading up our early education efforts, have had to say, what we're not necessarily looking to do is find the cheapest way to roll out this program, but we need to recognize that childcare is an industry where people are working pretty difficult jobs for very low wages, and it's predominantly women of color. How do we ensure that we're setting up a program that pays them higher wages or reasonable wages? And that's something that we're baking into our program design. So I think it's definitely a question that we are wrestling with and looking at as we think about how we're structuring, the city's programs.
Thank you. I'll turn it back over to Michael to ask the final question.
Hello, Ian. Thank you again for being here. Really appreciate you joining us. My question is how can the nonprofit sector be an effective partner with you in your role as city manager?
I love it. I mean, I think some of it is just to like keep in touch, give us feedback, hold us accountable. I think there's probably like larger questions, just how we coordinate it. And so I love this forum. And maybe some of it is like, as I think about some of these larger areas that the city's trying to make progress on, there is a bit of how to think about how the pieces fit together. And so I think that's always a tension in the nonprofit sector, because I think every organization has its sort of pretty unique mission and values and what it wants to get done. And then within those areas, though, like how do the 3 or 5 or 12 nonprofits fit together within that landscape? How is it coordinated, and how do we think about how we're serving what is sort of fundamentally the same community? I think maybe that's a question that I'm always thinking through in terms of the role of the city, the role of different nonprofits, and how we're actually working together. So I'd love to like be painting out that picture more clearly.
Thank you very much. Ian, before we move on, any closing thoughts from you, just as you've been sitting here thinking through these questions, being part of this annual meeting?
No, I'm pretty open if folks have other questions. Happy to field them.
Beautiful. Thank you. We are going to invite folks to take a moment to, again, just pause, like, wow, lots of really important information coming from the city manager into this communal space. What are you noticing? What are you curious about in terms of future opportunities to be engaging with the city manager around? What's a takeaway that you have around what you're hearing from the city manager? And I want to note, we won't have time to get to other questions in this moment. The intention here is that this is part of a continuing conversation. So the invitation to identify additional questions is both a now one and a moving forward one as CNC plans future opportunities, including in the fall, to engage further with the city manager. So just take a moment to use the chat. Great. So some sort of practical questions around how to reach out and engage with either the city manager or other departments. How might the nonprofit sector offer our own answers? Really important to be doing the internal work as well. Love that. Opportunity for regular nonprofit funding, like ARPA, but longer term. Thank you for that. Takeaway. Thanks, Gail, for that. All right. Elena, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Ian, for being here, for your answers to all of our questions. I'm excited about the potential in front of us. I think there's a lot that we could be doing, we could be exploring, as long as there's the willingness to do so, and I feel like there is. So thank you for that. All right, well, I believe we're getting close to time here. We have 4 minutes left. So yay for a meeting that ends on time, right? So thank you. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you to my team. Thank you to the steering committee. You could be lots of places today and you chose to be here, and we really appreciate it. And I would not be me if I didn't use this opportunity to also give a few reminders. So number one, this meeting has been recorded and we will share a link to the recording as well as the slides. Number two, Caroline is about to put a link in the chat to a survey. There it is. If it gets buried under the other messages, we'll post it a couple of times. Please take a few moments to fill that out. You can not only tell us about what you thought about this meeting, but also if you have interest in any of the things that we had talked about, the subcommittees, the member meetings, etc. And finally, do not forget to apply for the Cambridge Nonprofit Recovery Fund. The application closes on the 7th of July. And I think we also have some parting music. Caroline, if you could play, so you can enjoy some music, folks, while you fill out your survey. And then we can stop recording.